welcome to Arts Express. This is Prairie Miller, and on the show, in a celebration of the many voices of women around the world this week of International Women's Day, Arts Express presents a gathering of female voices in this collective presentation. First, one woman, a multitude of musicians and singers who have come together from more than 20 countries around the world, then moving on into the greater historical perspective of the way things are or should be.
ممكن تقفل du même endroit. I can hear you, Jerry, but I've got nothing on the mic.
Okay. In Kigali, she wakes up. She looks at choice. In Hanoi, Nata, Ramallah. In Tangier, she takes a breath, lifts up her voice. In Lahore, La Paz, Kampala. Though she's half a world away, something in me wants to say, we are one woman. You cry and I hear you. We are one woman. You hurt and I hurt too. We are one woman. Your hopes are mine, and we shall shine. In Wallace, she speaks the truth. She reaches out, then teaches others how to. In Jaipur, she gives her name. She lives without shame. In Manila, Sultan and Boo. Though we're different as can be, we're connected, she with me. We are one woman. Your courage keeps me strong. We are one woman. You sing, I sing along. We are one woman. Your dreams are mine, and we shall shine. We shall shine.
And one man, he hears her voice. One man, he fights her fight. Day by day, he lets go the old ways. One woman at a time.
Though she's half a world away, something in me wants to say, we are one woman. Your matrix leads us all. We are one woman. You rise and I stand tall. We are one woman. Your world is mine, and we shall shine. Shine, shine, shine. We shall shine. Shine, shine, shine. We shall shine. Shine, shine,
Commerce and trade might be quite beneficial, but Marxists are a girl's best friend. A tax cut is fine, but it don't pay the rental on your humble flat. or overthrow those autocrats. Callous cash gives me a rash. Don't the bus do this thing in the end? But Castro and Zinn know that rising tides don't lift all boats, and Marxists are a girl's best friend. I've heard of regimes that are brutally myopic, but Marxists are a girl's best friend. I long for a world that is pure and utopic, but governments are better bet. Socialists, time rolls on, and Mars is gone, and the left don't know where to begin. And this experiment that's capitalist but perfect. I don't mean liberal. Marxists are a girl's best friend.
There is a place like no place on earth. Some say to survive it, you need to be as mad as a hatter. Which luckily, I am. Alice, it's you. You're back. Alice!
Alice!
See, Alice? You're absolutely Alice. I'd know you anywhere. You're all late for tea!
Alice has returned to Wonderland.
Since you've been gone, the Red Queen has taken over all of Wonderland.
Find her!
Help us make the world right again.
Over there! I need a pig here. I love a warm pig belly for my aching feet. Stop that.
We have our champion.
And that was a scene from Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland, starring Mia Wasikowska as that mystified Alice struggling to make her way through that unconventional, to say the least, magical world. And the Australian actress joins us on the show to talk about her latest film, Blueback, in which she grows up as a child of environmental activists and now a scientist returning home to the Australian shores to fight against the corporations destroying the local ocean life. Likewise striking about her portrayal as Abby, a character originally a male, and how she came to play Abby as a female instead. But first, a scene from another of Mia's many unconventional portrayals as a nightingale in the animated Oscar Wilde The Nightingale and the Rose, also starring in this tragic tale Geoffrey Rush as the oak tree. Then Mia Wasikowska.
Here at last is a true lover. Night after night have I sung of him, though I knew him not. Night after night have I told his story to the stars, and now I see him. What I sing of he suffers. What is joy to me, to him is pain.
Who are you? Only a student.
Why is he weeping? Why?
Why?
He is weeping for a red rose.
For a red rose.
Go to my brother, and perhaps he will give you what you want.
My roses are red, but winter has chilled my veins.
Is there no way by which I can get it?
There is a way. It is so terrible that I dare not tell it to you.
I am not afraid.
Hello, Mia, and welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. Okay, great.
Why was Blueback a film you wanted to be part of, the story and your character?
It came to me sort of, I think, in the middle of the pandemic, and I just felt very ready for something that was positive and had a lot of heart and that was moving. And when I read the script, I sort of felt those things, and that combined with my really long friendship with Robert Connolly, the director, I just was thrilled. I read it one night, and then the next day I called him and I was like, I'm in.
Okay, now your character was originally written as a male. How did you approach and flesh out your character different in any way as a female and as opposed to a male?
Well, it was always a female when I was attached to it, but I remember long before I was attached to the film, Robert was telling me about this film he was working on and how they'd just had a big epiphany and they'd changed the lead character from a boy to a girl, and that it had started to come to life with that change. And I thought that I've always remembered him telling me that, and then, a year or so later he sent me the script and I jumped on board, and I just thought it was a really great change for this time, and also because it's true that a lot of women are really at the front of the climate movement at the moment, and especially female scientists, and I just think that that was a really great shift in the story.
Now, Blueback is also very much about environmental issues and their destruction by corporations. Is that something that drew you into this film, and in what way?
It did draw me in because I feel like I remember, it's so hard to know what to do or how to help. And sometimes I feel like what I liked about this film is that firstly there was a sense of positivity and hope, which I think is really important, especially for the younger generation. And then in terms of the message of it, I think one of the most important things that we can do is increase the biodiversity of our local environment. I feel like that's something that everybody, no matter where they are, has the ability to do if they really, want to or try. So, and I thought that was, a beautiful message in the film. Like, it's quite a sort of simple life that Dora and Abby lead, but they've made a huge contribution to the earth by focusing on protecting their local bay. And if that can inspire people to look at their area and see what they can do, then that's good for me.
And how is the destruction of the environment an issue where you live in Australia?
What's that, sorry? How is it an issue? Well, I live in Sydney, and it's an amazing environment here, so there's lots of opportunities to sort of get out and contribute. But I think it's the sort of thing you can do anywhere.
And Blueback is a different direction for you from your experiences in Hollywood. How would you compare a film like Blueback to your life in Hollywood films, both the positives and the negatives, and that about which you said, quote, after a while it leaves you feeling hollow?
Well, I just had a great time. I got to work with some really wonderful friends, and I don't know. I guess every film feels different to me, and that's one of the kind of joys of being an actor. I guess you can get to sort of experience all these different worlds, and get exposed to different skills and experiences that, So I feel like every film feels sort of different to me.
And what about your relationship to your characters' other selves? At the different ages of Abby, How did you approach distinguishing yourself from the other abbeys?
Well, I got to cross over with them by a couple of days when I was at the end of my filming as they were beginning. And we got to hang out a little bit and spend some time together. We didn't sort of have conversations about what we would do and blah, 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 mannerisms or whatever. And I think that was sort of that's the right approach, because you just want kids to be normal and natural and sort of make the grown-ups or the adults in the audience make the leap between their abbeys. But they just did such a beautiful job, those girls. Ilsa and Ariel are really talented actors, and yeah, it was wonderful to share the character with them.
Now, you've portrayed Madame Bovary, Jane Eyre, and Alice in Wonderland twice, and the Nightingale in Oscar Wilde's The Nightingale and the Rose. What is it about those classic literary figures that inspires you to portray them?
I don't really know. Part of chance. Those things have just sort of come my way, and I've thought they were really wonderful characters, and I've been sort of lucky enough to be able to play them. But yeah, I don't really know. I'm not sure. It's a period theme.
And where do you see your journey in film headed now and into the future, as to what inspirations to follow?
I don't really know. I'm definitely looking to sort of move into other areas of filmmaking, and I really like acting, but I'm definitely not doing it sort of in the way that I used to, even though I feel really lucky to be able to dip in and, you know, be a part of the industry and then sort of dip out. But yeah, sort of just hoping to continue doing my own thing and trying different things in life.
And what would you like Blueback and its theme of protecting the environment, in this case, ocean life, to convey to audiences out there?
Well, I hope it inspires them, and I hope that it moves people. I think that it's really important to have a sort of emotional connection to our environment. I think that's the best way to sort of feel compelled to change our behaviours and you know, make choices that take into account our, you know, climate crisis and you know, our local environment. And yeah, I think that if we care more, we're more likely to sort of, you know, respect the earth and yeah, each other. Yeah.
And anything coming up next for you?
I just finished a film in the UK, an Austrian-UK co-production, a film called Club Zero, and that's all at the moment. It's a film, it's directed by Jessica Hausner, and it's a film about a teacher who sort of starts to manipulate her students. So, yeah, well, I won't say too much more about it. I don't know. I actually don't know how to sum it up. I've never had to think about it before.
And what about directing?
Oh yeah, I would love to do that. So I'm hoping to move into that a bit. Trying to get some projects up over here in Australia.
And when Mia looks in the mirror, what does she see?
Oh gosh, it depends what time of day it is and how I'm feeling. Yeah, I don't know. I've been looking at a lot of Zoom today, and it's weird.
And any last word on Blueback?
I hope people enjoy it. I hope that, you know, it finds an audience in America. So yeah, here's hoping.
Would you say Blueback is different in any way as a film for children rather than for adults?
Well, I think both can enjoy it. I think it's, you know, really emotionally engaging on all levels for everyone. I think, you know, especially the mother-daughter relationship is really beautiful, and I've had a lot of older friends sort of comment on that, and then, you know, a lot of kids and my niece and nephews really enjoyed it. And yeah, so I think it's sort of you know, a true family film.
Thank you so much, Mia, for joining us on the show from Australia.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
and Blueback is out now in release. And coming up next on Arts Express,
did you know that the U.S. suffrage movement was the largest bloodless revolution in world history, enfranchising more people than any other law or effort? How about that the progressive movement from 1890 to 1920 was the greatest period of grassroots social reform in the history of the world, and that most reforms were carried forward by women and their clubs and organizations? Well, whether you answered yes or no, there will be plenty of opportunity this month to learn even more about the work of women in creating our nation, because March is Women's History Month. All month long, people all over the country will explore the many historical contributions of women throughout our history, something the National Women's History Museum does all year round. International Women's Day, on March 8th, largely influenced the creation of the first ever Women's History Week, and later evolved into a full month. The first International Women's Day, in 1911, came during a time of great revolution and solidarity amongst women's groups around the world. The celebration emerged from the activities of the labor and women's suffrage movement of the 20th century in North America and Europe, and the efforts of American women had great influence on the development of the holiday. On February 28, 1909, the first National Women's Day was observed in the U.S. The celebration, which was declared by the Socialist Party of America, helped spark the idea for an International Women's Day. In the early 1900s, many working-class women in New York City made their living through work in factories, making everything from clothes and shoes to household items and teddy bears for children. The conditions they faced were deplorable, being forced to work long hours, often facing abuse, and barely earning a living wage. Outraged, women in the garment industry began to strike. Though American women had led strikes from as early as the beginning of industrialization in 1824, the 1909 strike in New York City was historic, as wealthy female customers joined in support of some 20,000 striking workers. Led by the Women's Trade Union League, middle and upper class women donated money, arranged for legal representation, spoke to the press, and even participated in picket lines, and were arrested and jailed. Momentum came from further tragedy. 2 years later, on March 25, 1911, a devastating fire broke out in New York's Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, where women worked behind locked doors because management feared that a union organizer might slip in. 146 people, mostly female immigrants, either burned to death or were killed when they jumped from the 9th floor factory. That same year, in 1911, an International Women's Day was declared by German socialist Clara Zetkin and Alexandra Kollontai, a Russian feminist representing textile workers. The holiday celebrated the women's rights movement internationally and was also inspired by New York's working-class women, most of whom were immigrants. 6 decades later, during the 1970s, Americans continued to celebrate International Women's Day, and it gained increased popularity as the second wave of the women's movement gained momentum. At the same time, many universities during the 1970s felt pressure from the women's movement to teach an inclusive American history that represented all people, including women and racial minorities. As a result, schools began to include the fields of women's history and women's studies in their curriculum. In 1978, the Education Task Force of the Sonoma County Commission of the Status of Women in California convened a National Women's History Week celebration. The week was chosen to coincide with March 8th, International Women's Day. The following year, in 1979, Sarah Lawrence College held the Women's History Institute, which was chaired by noted historian Gerda Lerner, who was elemental in establishing the field of women's history. Prompted by the National Women's History Project in Northern California, President Jimmy Carter declared a National Women's History Week during the week of March 8th in 1980. International Women's Day was chosen as the focal date for this first celebration. And 7 years later, in 1987, Congress expanded the week to a full month.
And what you just heard was a presentation of the National Women's History Museum, part of a series created by Catherine Hardwick, director of the Twilight series, We the Economy, and Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities.
Okay, then listen. Let's not get caught.
What are you talking about?
Let's keep going.
What do you mean?
Go.
You sure?
Yeah. Get it.
Hi, it's Callie Corey, and I'm here on Arts Express. Thank you so much for having me. Thelma and Louise has been my first script. I'm very happy that it managed to find its place in the lexicon and still holds a relevance for women. There was no way to have forecast any of what happened, which was great.
And coming up next on Arts Express, Bro on the Global Film Beat, Class, Crime, and the Blonde Bombshell, the case of Marilyn Monroe versus Diana Dors. First, some scenes from Diana Dors in the 1957 trucker noir classic, The Long Haul, also starring Victor Mature, and a rare instance in the past when an abused woman gets to slug her male tormentor.
At last, the cameras probe for the whole violent truth about trucking industry mobsters and their women.
Getting just a little tired of waiting for you, Joe. I'm hungry and I want to go and eat somewhere.
You want to eat something, then eat something.
In this pig house?
Listen, you were serving in a pig house like this when I picked you up, baby. Watch out, I don't drop you right back among the pigs.
This is Bro on the Global Film Beat, Breaking Glass. Today's episode, Diana Dors versus Marilyn Monroe, Class, Crime, and the Blonde Bombshell. She was called the British Marilyn Monroe, but in fact, in very telling ways, their paths and personas were different. The difference conveys some important truths about Dors' society, Britain, one that was more class-based, and Marilyn's America, hell-bent in the 1950s on erasing any traces of class consciousness. Both came to prominence in the oversexed, because in actuality horribly repressed, middle and late 1950s, where misogynist terms like sexpot and bombshell were applied to any actress, though not to actors, who gave off even a whiff of sexual liberty. With Marilyn, this aspect of her persona was seen as part of her naive charm. With Dors, it was part of a bad girl image from which she never strayed. She truly maintained, as a critic once described Richard Widmark, who often portrayed seedy lowlifes, the courage of her own sordid convictions. Yet, underneath the tawdry image, in her British noirs of the period, The Long Haul, Tread Softly, Stranger, Passport to Shame, all available for free on YouTube, there was an acute identification with her working class roots, and with the pain as well as the solidarity that an exploitative class society often engendered. These films, in which she had a prominent role in the late 50s, were the precursors to the whole-scale entry of working-class characters into the British cinema in the early 1960s with what was called the angry young man, or the kitchen sink films, because they often featured working-class figures lurking around those sinks, beginning with Richard Burton and Look Back in Anger and featuring Carol Reese's majestic Saturday Night and Sunday Morning. Marilyn had a different trajectory. She too had a humble working class background, and in her early films, John Huston's The Asphalt Jungle, Roy Ward Baker's Don't Bother to Knock, and Preminger's River of No Return, she was often a set-upon outsider who still managed to maintain her innocence. But something happened around 1954 when she moved to New York and started studying at the Actors Studio, which nearly ruined the authentic quality she brought to her early roles. When she became an actrice and started acting, she began to conceal all aspects of her actual roots and moved toward becoming an unmoored icon in a 50s America that claimed to have abolished all class distinctions in the victory of capitalism. The low point of this second phase was 1956's Bus Stop, torn from the condescending New York stage, where she plays a bar singer who falls for a rodeo cowboy, Don Murray. Both are seen as nearly subhuman, so inarticulate they can hardly communicate, and the actrice Marilyn is happy to dumb down her character as she helps throw an upper-middle-class elite gaze on working people. Dors was the quintessential bad girl, a 40s label for women who breached the social code and sought independence, almost from her moment of entering the British film industry in 1948's Good Time Girl, about a rambunctious teen who breaks the society's rules and shows no remorse for doing so. After being condemned to a cruel women's boarding house and being a victim of a lascivious father, she breaks out, eventually led astray and into serious crime by first a gangster and then two hardened American servicemen. What is supposed to be a morality tale about the dangers of taking wrong turns, that is, defying a society with rigid rules for its working class women, instead, through Dors' refusal to radiate guilt, turns her tragedy into triumph. She then partially tried to reform and become a more standard blonde heroine, but that part of her persona never took. She instead went from brash prison inmate in The Weak and the Wicked to 56's Yield to the Night, an intensely sympathetic portrayal of a woman in her last days, condemned to death for the murder of an abusive husband. In its branding of capital punishment as actual crime inflicted by the state on female victims, that film shared the limelight with the American I Want to Live, done 2 years later, another meticulously sculpted portrayal of the sadism of the state's death sentence against, this time, a powerfully resilient Suzanne Hayward. Dors was lauded for her role at that year's Cannes Film Festival. Dors was then offered a contract with RKO in the U.S., and her persona was immediately altered in John Farrow and Jonathan Lattimore, the director and screenwriter of The Big Clock, to first bad girl and then repentant sinner in The Unholy Wife. She is saddled with a 50s loving, but actually coercive, arrogant, moralistic, Napa Valley wine merchant Rod Steiger, who can only think of their child, which his wife never wanted. Had it been made today, this film might have been called The Unhappy Wife, as in the end, Dors is stripped of her platinum blonde hair, and as a bowed brunette awaiting the electric chair, she repents and finds religion. The film, which strayed so far from her persona, was not a success. Perhaps the best thing that happened to her was that she returned to Britain and starred in 3 remarkable noirs. The first was The Long Haul, about a crucial sector of British working class employment, the trucking industry. Victor Mature, his hard-bitten face here still able to convey longing before he consumed himself in an alcoholic frenzy, stars as an American vet who signs on to a transport company run by a gangster. Dors is the at first equally hard-bitten gangster's moll who instead falls in love with family man Mature, but eventually cedes her place with him and returns him to his family as she consigns herself back to her former prison as a club girl at the Congo Club. She is both seductive, but in the end also attuned to Mature's wife and child. Her meeting with them is presented not as submission to bourgeois morality, but as solidarity in her recognition of their importance. This film and Hell Drivers, about the same industry, are almost a direct line to the British working class cinema that will follow, outlined in my chapter on British film and class crime and international film noir. Next comes perhaps the best of this trio, at least in terms of Dors' persona. In Tread Softly Stranger, she comes between two brothers in one of the bastions of the British working class, the northern steel town in Yorkshire of Parkgate. The film features extensive on-location shots of the factory, which one of the brothers, an accountant, intends to rob. Dors' character, Calico, at first a kind of freeloading sexual user, is pushing for the robbery and seems to be nothing but a gold digger, as she instead falls for the accountant Dave's older brother, Johnny, an itinerant gambler returned home from London to hide because of his debts. When the crime unravels, though, Johnny charges her with exploiting men. Doesn't anybody mean anything to you? She answers with a remarkable monologue which softens and makes understandable her path, and which is not only her character's story, but also partially autobiographical. I come from a slum, from the gutter, where it's quite a step up even to the pavement. I never had a home. I never had a father my mother could put a name to. I never had a thing till one day I found I was attractive to the opposite sex. My legs could be used for something other than to stand on. I had one talent. Most people haven't got any. So I used that talent, and I got tough. She then says she never loved anyone until Johnny, so in her mind, she was never unfaithful, but that she is faithful to him. The monologue is a clever deconstruction of the exploitive personality she was forced to adopt and her struggle to escape it. She will wait for Johnny, and this becomes the fullest expression of the pain behind the bombshell persona perhaps ever in the cinema. Finally, in Passport to Shame, Dors has the secondary role of the again hardened sex worker in a house of prostitution in charge of overseeing the initiation of a new recruit. The ingenue, though, falls for a taxi driver who eventually exhorts his buddies in the cab company to rescue the recruit. Dors also falls for a not particularly handsome but very sympathetic cab driver, friend of the lead character, helps participate in the rescue, and leaves with her new friend. Again, a film where her persona as hardened exploiter gives way to someone who returns to her working class roots, to male-female solidarity instead of cutthroat exploitation of each by the other, as she rejects the pull of the glamour of capitalist society, whose promise of material well-being is in the end seen as empty. Diana Dors had a remarkable career, particularly in the late 50s, at a time when Hollywood was simply full of beauties for their own sake, personified by Marilyn Monroe. She helped cast a new light on the working-class origins of these characters, which went a ways towards their ultimate dissolution, while also branding her as a working-class woman of the cinema par excellence. Perhaps the reason why her performances are now almost forgotten. This is Bro on the Global Film Beat, Breaking Glass.
Thank you, Dennis Bro. And now on Arts Express.
Hi, this is Jack Shalom. I'm always happy when there are new poems from poet Connie Norgren. Connie's ability to pack in so much meaning into a deceptively spare line makes her a favorite poet. She is the author of Falling Again, published by Finishing Line Press, and Same Boat, published by Five Spice Press. Her book, Tonight's Quiet, was selected by Alfred Korn as winner of the Bright Hill Poetry Book Competition. And now Connie Norgren reading her own poems.
Hi, I'm Connie Norgren, and I'm going to read some poems. And I'm going to start with some poems kind of about writing, and hopefully about other stuff too. And the first one is called Dear Page. An acorn's weight of heavy, but you are a room, a big room. You hold a touch, a waft, a leaf, a step, a cough, a look, a head turning, a crash and sirens, rain, a window opening slowly with a breath sound, refrigerator hum, plank of a door, a stretch of sidewalk, walk sign, glove dropped in the street just now or layered with weather, a pattern in the sand, the water in the sink, trembling. And this is a poem that kind of presents or brings back into memory Enid Dame, who was a great Brooklyn poet, organizer, teacher, editor of Home Planet News with her husband Donald Lev. She knew everything about Brooklyn and wrote it down. At one point in her life, she was in a medical facility and they wouldn't let her have a pencil. So this is a poem called Enid, for Enid Dame. Enid. Denied a pencil, she told them. I'm a poet, one hand still, one reaching. Her night harbor hair, black, black, the surge, the wave of it. The glittering boats far off, low sounds across the water and the caught light. An owl cannot see more, dark in a dark tree against dark sky, above nettles and thistles. Lilith and Eve hovering, all wild, with wild resting places, like any owl watching, soft-feathered owl. For Enid Dame. And this is a poem about spoken words as opposed to written down words. Dear spoken words, you words you blunder, wrung out wrong, sung flat, tossed into air. Some sounds, same old, or you're the laugh track, the rat-a-tat-tat of the TV from childhood. Any mouth moving that won't stop, won't stop, won't stop. You can't call yourself back, can't erase yourself. You only go on, get deeper in. Then one day or another, you crack open stone, make sky. And last time you asked me about my father or my family's influence on writing, and I realized, but from that question, when I was thinking about it later, that my father was a huge influence. He loved words. He was a printer, and he printed them out. But he also wrote 1 billion postcards, and they were very carefully crafted, and they were packed with words. And this is a found poem from some of his postcards. I have a whole cigar box filled with hundreds of them. And this is a compilation of lines from postcards. Postcard. My 5 a.m. project this Monday morning was to tackle the malfunctioning ever-ready flashlight. I succeeded by removing the plastic O-ring. Pine needles are falling fast. Bill next door is taking some. Ball of garden twine is available in kitchen entry. I have also marked the position of the linden tree root, which extends into the garden. Avoid digging or planting near it. The hillside in the back is approaching the zenith of autumn coloring. Are you recording your accomplishments in the log of work done? Now we're going into a different realm, but this is still childhood, and this is a poem called 1952. 1952. Many small hands folded, hands we called white, yours folded the same. You sat in the middle row, halfway down, serious, reading the words. You threw the ball back. All that lining up, pulling chairs into circles, standing to pledge. One nation. Then that sound, the fold-up seats falling flat, receiving the whole class at the same time. The sigh in the air after. Then the quiet, the killing quiet. And this is called Learn, which we are all doing as a nation, but not fast enough. Learn. For Trayvon, smell the damp air of nighttime Florida, his hoodie a soft covering for his head. For Oscar, imagine party joy, friends surrounding. For Sandra, her clear questions. Hear Philando telling the truth. See Kenneth Sr. at home, Kowalski at home, Mrs. Bumpers, Brianna, Mohammed at home, Amadou on his top front step, Stefan in his grandmother's backyard, Tamir with his airsoft at the playground, Michael Crawford holding a toy in a toy store, Eric warmed by the morning sun, Walter Laquan before running, Daniel before his unmooring. For Sean, celebrating. For Dante, his fine day so far. For Akai, quiet in the dim hallway. For Adam in the shadow. For George, easy that morning. His big hand opening. His big hands opening. And this is a poem based on a photograph, and it's called Border, for John Moore's photograph. This small face turned up to a stream coursing. The bottom of the 5-gallon jug is a moon, and this cascade catching in his hair in the folds of his ear is a cap of sparkling. His 2 hands offering the soft white of soap to the sky. You know this shining boy's skin, these eyes closed tight, this ecstasy. Here's water in a place where water is scarce. Here's John Moore with his camera. He saw this mother, her boy, this clean water flowing. Saw the loops and swirls of the tattoo on her slender wrist. Miguel Angel, it said, Miguel Angel. And this is called Dear Feet. I think we're going to some city poems. Dear Feet. Dear feet, you make your way. The worn linoleum, the same sidewalk hills. You used to find yourselves running. Dear eyes, you've seen the cold glitter of stars more than once, and dawn, and the leftover rain in the parking lot. Here's the bus at night in winter, heads nodding within, its body a house, its one softly lit room. Climb on, your heavy coat and others' heavy coats, everything spent. Dear mind, you go from choppy to ice to home, the churning sea, the light switch at hand. One of the places that I really love is the subway. and this is a poem for the month that's coming up. It's called Dear Beginning of March. Dear beginning of March, you grew a whole field of coats, all soft browns, some speckled, some dark as rained-on wood, all still as mushrooms. Here and there the fall of a scarf, flower of a hat, yellow bud of a dropped mitten. I'm at one end of the subway car, sitting, folded in, not wanting. I think this is the last one. Yeah. Seeds. Some random spiraling, and that's me landing there in the space between the small rock and some okay soil. A maple seed drifted down. You by the woodpile, smoke everywhere, that sweet smell. It's tricky turning into yourself. Or maybe that was you involved in the rock fall, sliding into the water, settling among pebbles. And if we happen to fit there, and whether we have enough air and or the wherewithal to wiggle ourselves unstuck when we are stuck, like the tiny trout going along, free now, hanging on to the rushing water.
And you've been listening to poet Connie Norgren reading some recent poems of hers. You can read her work in her books Falling Again, Sane Boat, and Tonight's Quiet. This is Jack Shalom for Arts Express with host Prairie Miller.
And that's all we have time for today on Arts Express, Expression in the Arts. And if you'd like to express yourself too, you can write to us at theradiogoddess@gmail.com. Until next time, this is Prairie Miller leaving the station.